Today's about building the plan. Q1 is almost over. If you're in B2B, um, if you're in B2B, I would argue that your quarter is already over. Um, Often in B2B, we have sales cycles that are much longer than other industries. But this is about building the plan. How do we build the plan for the rest of the year? How do we write a growth plan and actually hit our year-end growth goals? So welcome to the webinar. Each month we try to do a webinar on a topic. And right now, as we approach the end of the first quarter, we thought this would be a great topic based on conversations that I'm having, turning optimism into revenue. Quite a few of the companies that I'm talking to had really strong optimism going into 2026. But they're not hitting their growth plan. They're actually missing their growth goals. Most B2B sales teams missed their sales and profit goals last year, and now they're missing first quarter. What's going on? January started so strong. Well, if you look into it, it started strong because we had some carryover from last year. But it just drives CEOs and business owners crazy is they went into this year with so much optimism. And now as we close out Q1, it feels like the mad scramble again. What happened? And more importantly, what can we do so that we can still have a very strong year in sales and profits? Everybody that attends is going to get some tools. One tool is a diagnostic that I use with my clients to help them figure out, what happened versus what they thought was going to happen. A sales planning template. Today, we're going to talk about writing a sales plan based on data, not gut and intuition. And it's going to be like a 45,000 foot flyover, but the template is actually going to lead you through an entire thought process. What part of your growth is going to come from organic? What part is going to come from new products? What part is going to come from new business? What does that need to be? What's your value proposition? Who are some of your top accounts? What are their goals? It's a process that I've used for years with my customers to help them write sales plans that actually meet or exceed their goals. And then you're also going to have a marketing framework. I hope everybody on the call, everybody listening to the call has a strategic plan. And if you have a strategic plan, we need a sales plan and a marketing plan. The marketing plan should support the sales motions that we have in our sales plan. And you're going to get a template for that. So this is a familiar meeting that's going to start happening here the first week of April. January sales were high. One of my clients' sales were up 45% in January. And then February was a little bit softer, but now March, it looks like they're going to miss the goals and actually lose a lot of that growth they had in January. And teams are sitting around tables like this and they're trying to figure out like what happened. And then if you have investors or owners, those meetings are a little bit different. Not only are they wanting to know what happened, but they want to know what you're going to do about it. Quite a few of the people that I serve come through private equity. Private equity made an investment. About 7 out of 10 private equity investments are not hitting their value growth plans today. There's a lot of reasons. That would be a separate webinar in and of itself. I've written a lot of articles about it, though, if you're interested. But more importantly, they're like, look, you told us you were in agreement on the value growth plan. We had a plan. What's not working? And more importantly, what are you going to do to fix it and fix it quick? So how do we turn optimism into revenue? What happened? Why forecasts and optimism don't automatically create revenue? And what are the steps to convert optimism into predictable growth? That's really what we're going to talk about today. So real quick though, in the chat, what's your role? Are you a business owner, a CRO, VP of sales, sales manager, salesperson, PE investor, marketing consultant? What's your role? Just put it into the chat really quick because I'd like to understand. Oh, I see some people answering my earlier question. Yes, a podcast. What I asked earlier, if you just signed on, is I'm seeing a new behavior, and as a voice of customer guy, I really want to listen and adapt. Um, I'm seeing like for example, my last webinar, hundreds of people signed up, but only 18 people showed up live. I believe it's because people are busy. But what I'm also seeing is people want to listen to things on their time. I've had a number of clients ask me to create a No Smoke and Mirrors podcast. I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts, but I'd be happy to do that if that would better serve. I see one person said president, salesperson. Okay, that helps me understand who's on the call today, and maybe I can go a little bit deeper in different areas. Quick question. Will your team hit your plan in Q1? What do you think? A, yes, and then some. We blew by it. One of my clients I trained, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was speaking to their CRO recently, and they have a new problem. They've oversold capacity. One of their value propositions was they could ship in 10 days. Now they're out to about 4 weeks. So we were talking about how you need to adjust sales focus in times with oversold sales. Yes, I hit my goal. B, no, but I just missed it. I came really close. D, no. Or E, I missed it, and I missed it by more than 10%. Unfortunately, that's the number that I'm hearing is going to happen. I believe if you're familiar, there's a consulting organization in Cleveland called Magnet. They're one of the largest in the country, focused on B2B manufacturing. And they did a study. They actually interviewed a lot of their past manufacturers. And I think the number was 76% came into 2026, very optimistic. But last reports, about 48% are going to miss plan. So I'm curious, how did you guys answer this? Let me look. Are you guys going to hit or did you miss? I'm just curious. Also, one trade association that I served just did a study, and I think the number was 24.3% of members in this association are going to hit Q1. So that means the vast majority did not. Okay, I see somebody answered real quick. No, 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 but I just missed it. Thank you. So this data that I'm hearing, the discovery calls I'm having, is also resonating with the people on the call, but also likely the people that are going to be listening to this later. So why doesn't optimism predict results? Well, first of all, optimism is a sentiment. It's not execution. Um, about half my career, I've been doing this 40 years, over half my career, I was the VP of sales, the CRO, in a couple instances, the president, CEO. Um, and what used to drive me crazy is a salesperson that would say, yeah, man, about 90% sure this order is going to close in 30 days. And I would ask several questions that if they had 90% optimism, they needed to have answered, and rarely did they have it. Forecasts, when your sales team isn't trained, are often assumptions. They're not pipelines, and it's definitely not something that we can count on. And then quotes are not always qualified opportunities. I do quite a bit of work with people that make industrial machinery. And one of the segments that I serve is the compressed air market. One reason why is I was a sales manager in a compressed air business for about 2.5 years. And what I'm hearing from business owners, branch managers, is I'm confused. I have a huge pipeline, but it's just not turning into revenue fast enough. Well, that's because what's in your pipeline are quotes. They're not qualified opportunities. And then backlogs create a false sense of confidence. You look at your pipeline, you ask your sales manager, perhaps, you ask your CRO to create a forecast that you can share with the board, you can share with your investors. But then, like that one picture, we miss execution across your strategy, systems, and people is what really determines results. So, what do you think sales leaders, salespeople typically do when there's a sales shortfall? Maybe put it into the chat. What have you seen? What do those conversations sound like? Oh, we need more pipeline. Yep, that's one thing. I need better leads, right? Have you ever heard that from a salesperson? Um, but as we go through these things that you're going to be hearing, they're actually signals. When I hear them, for example, the next slide is about they blame. They blame the competitor. They blame the market. They blame the war. They blame inflation. They blame interest rates. The trouble is, that's actually an accountability problem. Um, I guess the best way to rephrase it is if you asked your sales manager, why did we miss Q1? And they said, well, our customers are really holding tight on money right now because of the uncertainty in the war. Okay, is that true? I mean, can we call some of the people that said that and validate that? Or is it an assumption? Because if it's not true and we create a campaign, we can create processes and systems based on that information that's not true, it's not going to work. When I say it's an accountability problem, what I'd like to hear was, yes, I thought that deal was going to close by the first quarter, and I obviously didn't have a strong enough business case to make them pull the trigger. So here's what I'm going to do. It's two different conversations. And unfortunately, a lot of salespeople haven't been trained to have those conversations. They push their sales team for more. Well, if 50 calls a week didn't do it, or 50 calls a day didn't do it, then I need to move it to 75. If 4 customer meetings a week didn't hit our numbers, then let's make it 6, let's make it 7. And what we're going to see though is, in an odd way, this hurts you. And let me explain. When we push salespeople, particularly untrained salespeople, to do more of what's not working, you're actually going to increase your pipeline. You're going to increase all those quotes in your system, and you're going to actually get worse. You're going to have a lot of information in your CRM that's not closable, and you're not going to have the information on what to do next. Or, worst case, they lower the forecast quietly. Now, why do I say quietly? Well, sometimes, the sales manager may adjust the forecast unbeknownst to the owner or the board. They may set up new goals. Look, we missed Q1. You know what? Let's make Q2 a little softer and push the volume out to Q3 and Q4. That is very dangerous. And that's actually one of the leading reasons why so many teams missed last year's numbers. More teams missed quota last year than achieved it, and particularly in B2B. And when you start moving goals, what I believe is a goal doesn't change. How we hit the goal needs to modify. So if your team didn't hit Q1 and they're recommending that, hey, maybe we should lower our goal till the war is over. Well, what do you say we more strategically attack the market? What do you say we more strategically create a value proposition based on what our customers want and need today, and identify their current constraints and do a better job, than our competitors, because not all your competitors are missing their goals. And that's often a harsh reality, for a business owner. They hear how tough it is out there. My warning, having led sales teams for so many years, is often what you hear is their last meeting. It's not feedback over 20, 30, 50 conversations like I would get for you if we were doing voice of customer research. It's basically the last meeting that they had because it's near and dear to them. But they lower the forecast, they push the forecast out. And when this behavior starts, it's actually a big indicator that you're going to have a very difficult year. And then we launch catch ups, right? Catch up discounts and promotions. How many people have seen that, right? End of quarter sale. Well, I'm actually working on an article now about how vulnerable are your Q2 margins, because if you missed Q1, then very likely, the salespeople, sales managers, feel very motivated to improve. Salespeople maybe didn't make as much money as they had planned, so they want to improve. And unfortunately, one of the behaviors that's going on right now as we wrap up the quarter is what's it going to take to get the order in by Friday? I need this order by Q1. And in my negotiations class, I teach that you're training your buyers to wait till the end of the quarter, wait to the end of the year halfway point, and you will discount. You're teaching your customers that there's a margin there that they can negotiate with. These catch-ups, these discounts, yeah, it may create more revenue, but your margin per revenue decreases. And in an odd way that often salespeople look at me confused, now they need to sell more to make the net income if they would have sold at the suggested price. So finally, after all this happens, the best CEOs eventually start asking different questions. What is exactly happening inside our sales process? My favorite question is, do we have one and are we following it? Um, a big symptom of missed goals is the team is not either following a sales process in the CRM, or they don't have one, or they don't have a CRM. So this is where CEOs start digging in the weeds a bit. What are our win rates for the team? And then what's the win rate per person? A low win rate per person can be an indication of additional training, coaching, not understanding systems, product. What's the quality of our pipeline? Another behavior that I often see in B2B companies is they really want a lot of deals. They focus on quantity over quality. They're not qualifying deals. I had one client in Missouri recently tell me that, we sent the quote. I says, I know, but did you qualify it? Well, what do you mean? I mean, it's another B2B company. If they win the business, I win the business. No, you really don't have enough information yet. Sales competencies. Less than 50% of salespeople in B2B roles have been trained. So they're really strong, with product and application, but their competencies and how they're answering the phone, how they're conducting themselves in meetings, if they're following up, if they're asking for the order, is costing you business. And then customer buying behavior. I hope we all can agree that buying behavior has changed pretty dramatically, even in the last 5 years. But having done this for so long, this is usually when all the air gets sucked out of the room. Before there were cell phones and laptops, we met with people face to face. And our main job was to educate and then uncover unmet needs and then prescribe. But today, depending on what study you read, anywhere from 75 to 90% of the sales process is over before somebody talks to your salesperson. If your salesperson is jumping right into education and not finding out where the buyer is at, you're going to lose opportunities. So most B2B people know their products extremely well. They know how to enter an expense report. That's one of the first things they learn, right? They know how to work in your system, but they lack selling skills, skills like discovery. I had mentioned earlier, following a formal sales process, business problem diagnosis. In this section, we actually teach business acumen. The conversations have changed, particularly in uncertain times, and the burden is on us in sales to connect the dots between what we offer and the impact it's going to have on our customers' bottom line. Florida State did research years ago, and they asked buyers, decision makers, I think it was 2,700 of them, what should salespeople be doing? Well, we want them to connect what they're selling to how it's going to impact my business. And then they asked them, well, how many people do that? And the number was only 15%. So there's a huge opportunity for B2B companies that want to grow by just teaching their people how to have business conversations. Can they articulate the value of working with you, and can they qualify the deal? Because when there's gaps, missing Q1 targets is almost inevitable, particularly if the goal has increased from last year. But what do the best companies do? What do the best leaders do? Well, they ask three questions. Number one, is our pipeline real? I've had clients actually ask me to go out and audit their pipelines. It's not unusual that after looking at the deals, they don't have enough information to be able to be predicted, or they're put in the wrong stage. Um, I teach a particular sales process. Some companies already have their own, but rarely do they have the CRM match the process. So we need to make sure deals are in the right buckets. Are we selling high enough in the customer organization? When I assess sales skills, and I like to do that before I work with a team, often they're not reaching decision makers. They're reaching people who are gathering information. They're reaching sometimes gatekeepers, but are they reaching the decision makers? For example, right now, I'm working on an opportunity for my business. I've had 3 Zoom calls. The last one had 11 people globally on the call. It was like at 5:30 in the morning. Um, each one of those is a persona, and each one of those has things that they value and that they're looking for. Your salespeople need to understand that relationship matrix at each of your key accounts. So if you're, let's say, um, you know, making products that are resold through, one of your partners, obviously you need to work with purchasing, but maybe you want to work with sales. Maybe you want to have a discussion with the owner, the CFO. And the question is, do your salespeople feel comfortable reaching out and starting relationships with those people? Are they trained on even building those relationships? And then the last question is, do our salespeople have the skills to close complex deals? Because B2B sales is much more difficult than B2C. If some of you are in B2C, yes, I have training. It's called the one call close for people that have showrooms. I did a lot of work for car dealers when I lived in Arizona. I actually taught them a different process to talk to people as opposed to pressuring them. Because when we can't answer those three questions, the pattern for the rest of your year is pretty predictable. You miss Q1, it's the mad scramble in Q2 to get caught up, and then we hope for a really strong third and fourth quarter. And if we haven't made any changes, it's very likely you're going to miss third and fourth quarter as well. So number one, what do we do? What's the steps? Number one, run an MRI on your business, your go-to-market system. I hurt my shoulder bench pressing not long ago. And if I would have gone into the doctor and he said, great, tell you what, take off your shirt. I'm going to get out a scalpel. Let's figure this thing out. I would have ran out of the office. Luckily, he did some manipulation. He did some MRI. He ran other tests. And we actually determined that I didn't tear anything. I just needed to fix it with physical therapy. What about your business? So what are some things we look at? Well, I look at your strategy. Are you targeting the right people, right industries? I do quite a bit of work in building and supply. And, I'm a big advocate of diversifying your portfolio. So if you sell to, let's say, big box retail, which a lot of them do, how about like custom builders? How about kitchen and bath? How about commercial? Um, let's diversify that portfolio, and each one of those is going to need its own strategy. Are you targeting customers that match your ideal customer profile? Because again, what you're going to see, particularly if your team missed Q1, is they're going to get busy. Salespeople feel safe when they're busy, but is it a good busy? I, when I work with clients, I don't want your salespeople finding their leads. I was working with a team actually in Oregon, and I would say over 60% of their outside salespeople's time was spent Googling people they should be calling on in each city. No, when I work with teams, we give them a target list of people that match our ideal customer profile. Well, how do we figure that out? One of the things that we like to run is a net profit by customer analysis. Chances are you're tracking revenue, you're tracking your costs, but what about all the costs of sale? In this analysis, we add those. And typically what we'll find is your top 20% of your customers are generating about 80% of your net income. You have a huge bandwidth, usually about 60% in the middle, where you're break even. And then you have a bucket, what I call profit leakers. And that's usually about 20% of your customers, give or take 10%, where you'd be better off putting a $5 bill in a box than servicing them under the current terms of trade. So back to ideal customer profile. Those people in your net profit by customer analysis that are generating most of your net income, we go out and find more people like them based on location, based on industry, based on size of business, complementary products. There's all kinds of qualifiers, but we create that list and then we target them. And then, are your value propositions differentiated? Oh, yeah, Mark, we're better. We're the best in quality. It kind of reminds me of Charlie Brown back in the day where, they're talking and all of a sudden you hear wah, 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 right? The best way to find out if your value proposition is differentiated is I want you to do an exercise. I want you to ask your salespeople to call you as if you were a targeted ideal customer. You're going to go to voicemail, your voicemail on your cell phone. And I want to hear why you should have a meeting with you. Why should they have a meeting with you? What is the value proposition they're telling your customers? And I joke quite a bit because I've had so many of my prospective clients do this exercise, and that actually shortened my sales cycle. I tell them you better be prepared. I mean, have some bourbon with you, sit down, and when you hear these, you're going to probably stop after the third one. It's not that they don't want to succeed. We haven't given them a value proposition that differentiates you from others in your industry. And quite frankly, there's a lot of competition out there. And I'm just checking, somebody put something in the chat. And I'm arguing that how we sell could be your differentiator because, again, so many teams haven't been trained. And then, are the sales motions, the behaviors your salespeople are doing, aligned with how buyers buy today? That's a question we really need to understand. And one way we can understand it is by interviewing them, whether you do it or whether you hire a team like ours to do voice of customer research. I mean, the smallest sample size we've done is 30 interviews. At the end of last year, we just finished a project with 450 interviews. And then, are you focusing on ideal customers? And then evaluate your sales team. Like I said, are we following a formal sales process? Does the team have strong discovery and conversational intelligence skills? You can find that out just by being in a meeting and have a flash drill. Hey guys, I know you hate it, but we're going to do a role play. Here's the scenario. Let's start. You're going to know very quickly how they're talking to your customers if you're not traveling with them. Do salespeople know how to qualify opportunities? Or is every quote an opportunity, right? Are they creating new opportunities or just quoting? Are they too quick to quote, other words? They want to get it off their desk. Yeah, marketing sent this lead. The guy's asking for this. I sent him a quote. If you hear that, they're not doing discovery. They're not following a formal sales process, and likely they didn't qualify the account. They don't even know what the person's budget is. And is the sales team asking for the order? Closing is by far the biggest sales skills gap that we see in B2B sales today. There's a lot of reasons why, but for example, I just assessed a team. It was like 65 salespeople, and their team scored 6 out of 100 in closing skills. 6. So the issue we had there was they've never been trained in closing skills. So we can shorten that gap. But also sometimes it's a mindset issue. Oh, if I ask for the order, I'm going to be seen as a pushy salesperson. No, we got to work on that mindset. Do they know how to displace competitors? I never want salespeople talking ill of competitors. However, We need to equip them in their sales playbooks with, you know, some SWOT analysis. Where are we strong? Where are they weak? Where are they strong? And then teach them how to ask questions that surface maybe their current supplier's weaknesses. Can they run discovery with multiple stakeholders again? As you can imagine, your conversation with a buyer is going to be a lot different than a conversation with a CFO. And if what you're selling has a lot of zeros in the quote, at some point you're going to talk to probably a CFO. Do they have a formal follow-up process? I have a course on follow-up. I actually teach a cadence, what to say, what not to say. But even recently, I was talking to a potential new client in Missouri, and what the vice president says is, "Well, we don't need to follow up. We're a B2B company. If our customer wins the job, we'll win the job." No. Matter of fact, we actually proved that to be true at another client in a similar industry. Sometimes I do online training, sometimes I do, a workshop face to face. And we reviewed the follow-up training, and then the CEO handed out Excel spreadsheets on paper to each salesperson for every deal in their pipeline. And we just reminded them on what good follow-up looks like, and we asked them to follow up. They had 60 minutes. I'm a big fan of time blocking. They had 60 minutes to follow up. The CEO was blown away. They saved over 12 deals that were going to go sideways just because the customer had changed their requirements and their customer didn't communicate that. But they closed about $79,000 of business in that short amount of time just by following up. And can they design and deliver a business case? Again, that gets back to talking about the impact that your product has and the impact of working with your team. Evaluate your marketing engine. I'm not going to read through all these. You'll get a recording of this, but is marketing generating qualified opportunities? What do I mean by that? I'm working on a webinar I'm going to be doing with one of the leading marketing companies in the Cleveland area. And we're both seeing the same thing. Marketing and sales, like I mentioned in the bottom question there, seem to have different definitions. Marketing is sending people to sales today that maybe downloaded a white paper, attended a webinar like this. That's not a lead. Now, it's somebody that's interesting and somebody that might be searching. I recommend that somebody reach out to them, but don't call it a lead. If you call it a lead and the salesperson says, no, I called them and they said, well, they just were interested in the white paper, or they have no interest. Very quickly, salespeople are going to stop following up on what marketing calls leads. We need to define what's a sales qualified lead. And is the content in your marketing educating people? Because again, the numbers are very high that people are self-serving today. They're going out and doing their own research. And are the campaigns aligned with your ideal customer? These spray and pray tactics that we used to have in sales just aren't working. Actually, it could be hurting you. It was either Gartner or Forrester did a research study. Big numbers, like over 70% of B2B decision makers said, look, if I get a lot of emails from somebody, not only will I not respond, I'll probably never buy from them. And then they went on to say, if the email is irrelevant, in other words, not written for me, they're creating what I call brand damage. I'll probably never work with that salesperson or that organization. So I really recommend that we, give a lot of thought to our campaigns. And then, is your website producing qualified leads, educating, demonstrating, in other words, building competence and trust? The way we do that is through case studies, success stories, customer testimonials, and don't make them too fancy. One of my clients actually did several Zoom interviews with customers, one of which was in a van on the way to a job. And it was one of the most visited videos that they had on their website. It was authentic, it was real, and it was a customer saying why they bought from that customer, that particular client of mine. Strategic lead funnels. Your marketing team should be talking about creating those funnels and converting traffic into conversations. that's the goal of our websites today. And what you'll see is the top producing ones answer buyer problems clearly. They're seeking answers to problems. They're not looking for the largest manufacturer or the manufacturer that's been doing this 50 years. No, they have a problem and they're searching for it. And are you showing up in those searches? That's another thing that we need to look for. And by the way, AI searches are now starting to surpass some of the Google searches depending upon your industry. So are you showing up? And the dangerous thing about an AI search is they often answer the question and people don't click on the link to your company. Provide clear calls to action. Does each part of your website have a next step? And are we converting visitors to conversations and leads? And the good news is sales is no longer like a dark art. We can track all of this. All this data is out there. And then look at your data. Speaking of data, look at patterns by industry, determine which customers are buying repeatedly, which ones have dropped off, create your plan for inactive accounts. And then is there somebody new that is doing some really good volume with you that wasn't even on the list last year? Maybe they're in a new industry. One of my clients discovered this last year, fourth quarter. One of their top 10 customers had not even been on the list the year before. And we actually discovered that their product was being used in another industry. And then as we went into this year, we created a campaign to find others like them in that industry. So your data, again, the saying is there's dollars in your data if you know where to look. So you have a lot of data. Let's spend some time looking at it. Again, net profit by customer, by product, by salesperson. Find and repair those profit leaking customers. There's 5 ways. If you have a profit leaking customer, the easiest and quickest is obviously stop servicing them, but that's a last resort in my training. You need to teach your salespeople how to have business conversations because there's a likely probability that if you're not making money, then something changed in the terms of trade and we need to adjust. And then a CRM pipeline audit. Take out the unqualified opportunities. Either move them into new buckets, but if they're just like somebody that downloaded a white paper, they should be in your marketing follow-up. They shouldn't even be in sales yet. Confirm decision makers and timelines. Are we talking to decision makers or are we talking to gatekeepers? And then validate budget and urgency. We have an entire course on how to create urgency. B2B salespeople are typically good at finding problems, but when it comes time to making them urgent to solve, there's a skill set there where they need help. And then restage your deals. You just finished Q1. Again, your pipeline may look really good for Q2, rest of year, but what do you say we actually make it real? And then based on what we discover, I mean, it might not be great information. At least we can build a plan and build a real pipeline. This is where the salespeople are going to fight you. Only include qualified opportunities. Before we move somebody, ask your salesperson to qualify the opportunity. Make a phone call. Give them the list of what we need to know. And then focus your salespeople on the opportunities that have the highest likelihood to close if they're using the CRM correctly. Unfortunately, quite a few B2B salespeople believe, well, I need to treat every customer the same. No. The activity and the time and the focus you give customers should be weighted. It should be weighted on the likeliness to close, the value of the opportunity, and that's where a sales manager can coach. And then does your sales behaviors as you go into Q2 support the pipeline ratio? In other words, I recommend like a 2 to 3, 3 to 4 times what you need in the pipeline. Quick way to look at it is, let's say your close rate is 50% and your target is $10 million. Well, then you need 20 million in the pipeline to hit 10. And then I take it to each salesperson because typically each person has its own close rate. One of my clients has a 75% close rate. So what they need in their pipeline is much different than somebody, let's say it's 20 or 13%. And then write your plan. So it sounded like, Mark, man, that sounds like so much work. No, it's actually not. I made a very thorough list of what an MRI on your business can include, but you can assign some of these data sets to different leaders in your company. And typically, we can get all the data we need in less than a week. I definitely can assess the skills of a team in less than a week. The only thing I can't do for you is the voice of customer research. That typically takes 4 to 5 weeks. And then, does your team have a strategic growth plan? Um, Often, what I find is B2B companies have a goal. Last year we did 42 million. This year we want to do 45 million. Then they take that goal and, let's say we have X number of salespeople. Sometimes they just divide it by the number of salespeople. Sometimes they look at the salespeople and said, yeah, Frank carried about 40% of our goal last year, so he's going to carry 40% of our new goal. Um, but that's not a plan. That's a goal. What I recommend is a strategic plan. I wrote a book, Driving Explosive Growth, and I talk about how to write your strategic plan. Your strategic plan shouldn't just say where you want to go, but how you're going to get there. And then, do you have a sales and marketing plan? So we've written our strategic plan. Sometimes it takes 2.5 days. It's a pretty thorough process, but then we need a sales and marketing plan to back it up. Um, and then it's time to define, like, what's our current revenue? So you've done all this research, and then what's the rest of the year revenue goals? What are our target industries, pipeline creation targets, marketing campaign to support our growth? Again, if you're looking at entering a new industry, your strategy is going to be different than if your goal is to grow more with your large key accounts. And then in your plan, how much revenue do you plan to get from organic, new customers, new products, and your large strategic accounts? And in the template, you'll actually see placeholders for this. This really gives you a clear picture of what needs to happen. When you start filling out this data, oh my goodness, to hit my new number, that means I'm going to need 15 new accounts that do at least $30,000. Now you know what we need to do, and then we have to train our salespeople on how to do it. Like I said, I like pipeline coverage of 3 to 4x, depending upon your close rate. What's your win rate, average deal size, sales cycle length? That's often an indicator of salespeople that need trained. Take a look at your average sales cycle, and if one of your salespeople or a couple of them is taking twice as long, then either they're not communicating your value or they just need some sales training and coaching. And then you've identified industries that you serve. Create a goal by industry. And again, look at that data. Did one industry show a growth last year that maybe we should spend more time growing this year? And then what's our cost per lead? I want every customer that I work with tracking this. It often surprises their leaders. I was helping a company that made CNC, very large, expensive machines. Their cost per lead was like $750. That totally changes on getting a return on that investment. A lot of you maybe had a sales kickoff meeting. If you're not familiar with sales kickoff meetings, if you didn't have one but would like one, I wrote a white paper on it. You can go to my website. But in the SKO, a good SKO meeting is not only going to share where we're going, but how we're going to get there. And it often includes behaviors, new behaviors. We're going to need to, whatever those are. So are they doing it? And then monitor the lifetime value of a customer. And then take a look at your compensation. Is it supporting the behaviors that you need to hit your plan? Your incentives must reward the right behaviors. So let's say a big part of your strategy was growing key accounts. Well, maybe we could put a reward, a bounty on key account growth by quarter. Maybe it's growing your top 5 strategic accounts. Maybe it's opening up net new business. I've seen quite a few customers have a lot of success putting a bounty on new business. We just need to define it. They need to match your ideal customer profile. and then reinforce the culture. At some point, B2B teams, whether it's after private equity investment or they're preparing to sell, they need to have a performance-based culture. Often, the B2B companies and distributors that I work with started out as like a family business. Their work actually caused their growth, but as they grew, they kind of hit a plateau and sometimes even feel a little bit of a decline. It's time to actually create those sales SOPs like you have in your production facility. Now we need to have them in sales. So, how do we turn optimism into revenue? Diagnose. That was over half my slides, but it's areas that I'd like you to look at because once you get the data, you have a team of smart people. You can write a strategy if it's based on data, not just gut and intuition. And then if you find some flaws, fix those strategies and systems. Upgrade sales skills to execute. I was asked to speak at an event in Denver, I believe it was last year or the year before, and it was pretty much the C-suite. CEOs, CFOs, CROs, and it was like 300 people in the room. And it was about strategic planning. And obviously, I wanted to make it interactive. So I asked the audience, how many of you have a strategic plan? Every hand went up. How many of you have a plan that needs to grow 10% or more? Almost all the hands stayed up. And then I asked a question, how many of you believe 100% of your team have the skills to execute that plan? There wasn't one hand. I said, okay, 70%. 70% of your team have the skills to execute your growth plan. No hands. So eventually I got down to 30 to 40%. All the hands went up. So here's what gives me pause. Earlier in the discussion, I asked them how many hit their numbers last year, how many didn't. Even those that didn't, did you see a growth in expectations from your investors and owners? Yes. So you've just signed up for a growth, sometimes 15, 20% maybe. You didn't hit last year. You know that your sales team, your other people in your team need training. That's going to be a difficult year. So if you know this, or if you need to determine who has the strength and who doesn't, that's a pretty quick exercise for most jobs. Upgrade their skills, put them into training, whether it's live, virtual, you can find some online programs. My only caution with online programs is salespeople often turn it on so they can show that they completed it, but they're doing emails, they're cutting the grass, they're doing other things. And then manage real pipelines. Make sure what you're looking at is real before you go to your investors, your board, and then execute. Make sure you're tracking execution, those leading indicators as well as lagging indicators. And if you wrote a new plan and it's still not hitting, adjust. Optimism must be supported by execution. And quite a few people track goals, but they don't track execution. And that's something that I want to help teams do. Diagnose your revenue engine. Pretend it's one of the machines on your shop floor. If a machine on the floor was no longer creating the throughput, you would diagnose what's causing it. You would either improve it, buy additional tooling to make it better, or you might even replace it if it's so worn out. You know how to do this. You've done it in operations for years. And then align your strategy, people, and compensation. Those are the key takeaways. So in the spirit of learning science, for those of you listening to this, you need to do something. Pick 1, 2, 3 actions that you're going to take based on what we discussed today. Because if you don't, by tomorrow at this time, you're going to forget 90% of what you're hearing. So are you going to audit your CRM? Are you going to determine if your salespeople can adequately share your value proposition? Are you going to run a net profit by customer analysis and find out which accounts are profit leaking right now? Are you going to assess the skills of your sales team? Are you going to do a website audit? That's something that we've been doing lately. It's not that expensive. We actually audit your site for where it ranks, but more importantly, what keywords and phrases are bringing people to you, and more interesting, what keywords and phrases are bringing people to your competitors that are not on your website. What are the three things you're going to do? Because if you act on what we just discussed, you'll remember it. Everybody that attended is going to receive a recording. You're going to get those three assets. And I should say everybody that signed up, because again, quite a few people signed up but didn't show up. And I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to start working on my blog. And what I'll do is I'll give sales advice, coaching tips. I'll interview sales leaders. I'll make it a useful asset for everybody in B2B sales. Are there any questions before we sign off? Okay, I don't see any, but thank you for being here. I hope you gathered one or two key insights that you can use and help you grow. If you're struggling and you use the templates that I said and sent you, and you'd like to pressure test your sales plan, let's schedule a call. I don't charge for, 30-minute conversation to maybe coach you on using the tool that I created. Um, but if your team needs even more help, if you missed your goals by 15%, 20%, let's schedule a call. I'd be happy to help and serve your team. Thanks, everyone.